very much for inviting me to speak. Maitrivajri and I are going to do a double act. We did this yesterday to an audience, I think about a third of the size at the most. So it's wonderful to see so many people here. I just wanted to start off by saying a little bit about, well, actually, Maitrivajri, do you want to start off by saying a little bit about the process, about why we ended up being selected?
Cindy's very modest, you see, so she doesn't really want me to talk about how we came by her. Yeah. So just for those of you who don't know, when we felt ready in our process to appoint the architects, we what do you say, threw the net wide? Is that the right expression? Anyway, cast a net wide, that's right. So we had 5 recommendations of architectural firms from within our community, and I knew that we had to get the right architectural firm. I knew that if we could find the people who do it for the love of art, we would have the retreat centre that we so desired. So I actually rang up the RIBA Client Advisory Service and had some lovely conversations with a young man there called Rob Earle, and he came up with 4 architectural firms. Yeah? So then we had 9. Yeah? Some we disregarded because we thought they were far too big and we wouldn't get the attention that we wanted. And some were far too small to have handled this project. And that meant that we were left with 3. So then we entered a competitive process with those 3 architects, and they came and visited the London Buddhist Centre and got a feel for how we practice. They came and visited the site and saw around the existing retreat centre. And then we asked them to come and just show us some examples of their work in particular areas. So we knew that no one had designed, for instance, a shrine room for the Triratna Buddhist order in the UK before. So we asked for an example of a special place. So maybe it was a courtyard, maybe it was an art gallery, but something that spoke about an aesthetic and reflective sensibility. We asked them also to show an example about communal living, so not just in the residential or domestic realm, but actually work that they had done that showed that they knew how to accommodate groups of people living collectively. And then we asked them to bring their first ideas, and Walters and Cohen shone. So I feel very, very grateful, and I think we're very fortunate to have had the architects that we have had, and for their willingness to involve themselves so much with us, our community, the way we practice. They've learnt to meditate, they've been on retreat. And we're still friends.
Must got to work a bit harder on the meditation. Thank you. So, and we were actually in Venice. I was with my business partner and some colleagues in Venice at the Architecture Biennale when we got the call from the RIBA, and we were just on our way back to the airport, and we knew that this call had come through. We knew that this project was a possibility. We knew we were in competition, and I just felt this really strong feeling about this project. I hadn't met Maitrivajri, I hadn't met anyone from the LBC, but we'd seen a written brief from the LBC, and just the way the brief was written, using words like beautiful, people usually avoid that word when it comes to architectural briefs, can be a bit subjective. And I just said to my business partner, that's our project. No one else is going to get that project. I just had this really strong feeling that was going to be the case. So thankfully it worked out. So this was, I just wanted to start with this sketch because this comes out of an old notebook of mine. And it was in response to that first written brief, before we'd met anyone, before we'd understood, we'd seen the site. But we knew about Triratna, we knew what it meant. We knew that it meant 3 jewels. This idea of 3 appeared very early on in the process, and you can see from this sketch that there was this idea of a residential courtyard, a communal place, and a place of meditation and practice. And there's all these notes on here that I look back on the sketch and I'm quite amazed because it says precious side, and it says views to a garden from the walkway. And at the bottom here, there's an email address of one of my colleagues who was here yesterday, Giacomo, because I'd gone somewhere and asked somebody to scan and send the sketch back to Giacomo and said, what do you think? So, and that was the beginning of the process. And we then went through the competition. We then were told we'd been selected, and then the whole process stopped because the LBC, and this was a very good example of how careful and cautious the LBC were as a client, thought, hang on a minute, is Vajrasana even the right place for this retreat centre? Have we really thought this through? So we stopped for a while, 3 or 4 months, and while we looked around, LBC looked around to make sure that this was the right place to build the new retreat centre. And then one day we got the call from Maitrivajri to say, right, we're off, and that was about 3 years ago. So it's taken almost exactly 3 years from that phone call to now to design the building, to get planning permission, to find a contractor, and to build it to get to where we are today. Maitrivajri mentioned the whole idea of collaborative working has been mentioned. This project is just an exemplar of that. This team of people were how we started. There's a Vajra, Maitrivajri, and some of the engineers and other members of the team. They were all almost all of them were here yesterday, and that's continued through to a very close collaboration with the contractors, and they were many of whom were here yesterday too.
Can I just say something about that? What was really lovely about this group of people is that they were wholehearted, very, very wholehearted, very skilled, but people didn't necessarily keep to their disciplines. If they had an idea about something else, whether it was about how we even might use the spaces or who we were providing them for, they would say. So that idea of everybody being involved in a very creative way was there from the very first site meeting.
So, and we came to this place then, this site, that was what we saw. We saw a beautiful, very flat landscape with these big skies, and the whole project started from was about how to relate to the landscape, not just the immediate landscape around the buildings, but the broader landscape. And when you think of historic Buddhist architecture, you think of Tibet or Bhutan. There are mountains in the background, and the whole emphasis is very vertical. And here we had the exact opposite. This this flat landscape and this horizon and this enormous sky. And then this was the Vajrasana that we inherited, which a lot of you will remember and recognise. So we had the farmhouse, the Akshobhya pond, and the two solitary huts, and then a collection of farm buildings, sheds, and various other things in between. And we thought very long and hard about how many or which of the existing buildings on the site we could keep. There was no desire to throw anything away that was salvageable, but some of the buildings you could have literally pushed over, and others were in a condition that to have spent a lot of money on them to put them back into use would have been possibly counterproductive, but also we would have then had to arrange everything else around them, and that didn't seem quite the right thing to do. So this is what we kept. We had the main farmhouse with its little outbuilding, the Akshobhya pond, and the two solitary huts, and that was it. Just some trees around the perimeter and these fantastic views of the surrounding landscape. We always had this instinct that Akshobhya somehow needed to. When I was very moved by the Akshobhya figure when I came here on retreat. The Akshobhya Rupa was something I thought was just incredibly beautiful and very specific to this place somehow. And I just always had a feeling that it should be brought into the fold, but we weren't quite sure how to do that. So I mentioned at the beginning about the number 3, and the idea of courtyards. And the courtyards came very early on because everyone who knows this place will know that the wind blows quite hard sometimes. There was a feeling, and also it feels quite exposed because of the flatness of the landscape and the bigness of the sky. So there's always this idea to make people feel protected, and the idea of courtyards came very early on. But obviously courtyards have a very strong tradition in Buddhist, again, the historic tradition in Buddhism. And so we looked around at other temple precincts, at other sacred precincts, and at how buildings are arranged in relation to each other that very rarely are spaces the same size. There's often a way of circulating around the outside of the spaces, looking in, and sometimes even looking out. So there was a whole spatial construct around how we arranged the buildings on this site, with a kind of a strong historic reference. And then we started. So the pink on this diagram is are the buildings that were existing. Only, as I said, the farmhouse and the 2 solitary huts remained, and the rest went. And you can see our sort of early tentative attempts to arrange the accommodation around 3 courtyards and bring Akshobhya sort of closer into the frame. That rectangle with a circle in the middle of it is the Akshobhya to scale, moved from its existing location. And very sort of quite quickly, and I say quite quickly because everything that we did on this project involved an awful lot of discussion. Vajrasana said something yesterday that I sort of made a fairly light reference to, but it was that this whole centre was going to be a step forward for Buddhism in the modern world. But that felt like an enormous responsibility. I made strangely enough. So and not being a Buddhist, I myself, I had to ask a lot of fairly stupid questions all the way through. Why is it like that? Why do you do it like that? And often the answer would be, we'll get back to you on that. This idea of an axis of devotion came fairly early on. So and obviously related to the Sangha, the Dharma, and the Buddha, we thought that might be a way of structuring 3 key spaces.
Can I just put them here too? I think too that what Walters and Cohen picked up on very early was we didn't just want a retreat centre where what goes on in a retreat is housed. We wanted a whole site that expressed something to do with our Buddhist values. And this was one of the first and sort of one of the major ways that this started to take shape. So it's not just fit for purpose, it expresses something.
And Subhuti said something yesterday in his marvellous talk about, which really moved me as well, that this was not a place for synthetic Buddhism. And I think that was something we also felt very sort of strongly about from the very beginning. There was everything needed to be reduced down to its essence. There was no room for anything superfluous or anything that would detract from the very important elements of this place. So I suppose then this idea of this axis of devotion, the three spaces, the 3 jewels, the Sangha, the Dharma, and of course, most importantly, the Buddha. And that then led to a whole organisation of how the space might work. So there's Sangha about gathering and eating, and the reason those arrows are all over the place was because we hadn't quite worked out how people would need to circulate across the space. And it's quite funny now talking about this as a diagram when having witnessed how it's used for the last couple of days by a large group of people. And that's exactly how it works. People meander across, and that's wonderful. And then to the Stupa courtyard where there's, and last night I witnessed and experienced for the first time the way the Stupa courtyard could work, and the way people move around the Stupa in this circumambulation, which we'd always talked about, but I'd never actually seen it happen. And last night was just, there was just this amazing atmosphere of people walking around the Stupa and these shadows on the. Anyway, you needed to be there, and then to obviously the stillness and the quiet of the meditation and the practice that happens in this space. And so the sort of activities that were going to take place in each space informed how they ended up evolving, and also the character of those. So quite quickly we came up with this idea that the Sangha courtyard would be quite green and lush, and those plants are all quite little, but they'll grow up and be quite evergreen and quite textured. And then to the Dharma, the Stupa courtyard, quite dry and monochromatic, and with a completely different character and feel and focus, and into the shrine room, which is nestled into this landscape that will ultimately grow up and be quite an established woodland, very symbolic for the shrine room, obviously, for obvious reasons. I'll talk more about the design of the shrine room, but when you stand at the back where Vajrasana is standing and you look this way, you see the canopies of the trees. So, and those trees, the more trees will grow and grow up, and eventually this whole building will be nestled into a sort of quite traditional woodland.
Can I just pop in there too?
Yeah.
So, although I'm jumping a little bit, I think you can already see that the quality of light through the Jali wall, through the hit and miss brick, changes with the time of day. It will change with the seasons, and it gives a very dappled light. And part of that really adds to the symbolism that we are with the Buddha, in the forest, meditating with the Buddha under the Bodhi tree. So there's another layer there of the building expressing something about what's so important to us.
Yeah. And it all came together in a composition around these three spaces, around the way people are going to move from one space to another, the key activities that will happen in the space. And as I witnessed when I came here for the first time on retreat, there's a lot of emphasis on tea. And you know, we spent an awful lot of time talking about tea and shoes on and shoes off and you know, all of that. So when I came here on retreat, it wasn't very nice weather, and I spent the whole time taking my shoes off, putting them on again. They got muddy, getting wet, going from one building to another. I thought that's something we could probably solve in a new retreat centre. And then that all of that came together in this, what you see here, which is a sort of, we call a master plan. Not all of these trees and plants have been planted yet. Importantly, you come in on the corner here from when you arrive at Vajrasana. We wanted everything that was noisy, messy. It's a retreat centre, so we didn't want trucks and deliveries and the gas tanks being filled up, or septic tank being emptied, or anything like that to disturb a retreat. So the idea was that it got progressively quieter as you come in. Then the idea was, then obviously the farmhouse stays where it is, and the farmhouse is where the community who live here and look after the place live, and they have their own sort of private place. But you come into this axis, which leads you straight out again and into this marvellous landscape. The first thing you see is the communal building. And that was very deliberately placed there so that you felt this sense of warmth and welcome, had this idea of people coming. When we came on retreat, we came from LBC, it was dark when we arrived. It was that sense that you welcomed into this warm place. And it's about that strong sense of community. And everything after that gets revealed quite slowly. So the furthest out of the solitary huts, they get the most privacy, the most separation. So first off is the communal building, then the accommodation wrapping around the Sangha courtyard, then further into what we then started to call the shrine precinct, which is the Stupa courtyard, the shrine room, and then the Akshobhya courtyard off to one side.
And all of this sits within the landscape that BHSLA, the landscape architects, they became involved very early on. So right from the beginning, they were helping us with the orientation of the building, with the glimpses through to the landscape. But they also looked at the regional plan for the whole area, and how the council was really trying to bring back some of the woodland that had been here in pockets. So Vajrasana also becomes part of that stitching in of returning land to woodland, to its more natural state within a strongly agricultural area.
And then as Maitrivajri is referred to, the idea of, so this became the plan of what we then called the shrine precinct, and the red arrow indicates this threshold that you step over. Today and yesterday there was a ribbon across that opening, and there's also a strip of bricks in the floor. We talked for an awfully long time about whether there should be a door or a gate or something that was a physical separation between the Sangha courtyard and the shrine precinct, and it became less and less important that it be there. And we think it could be there at some stage in the future if anybody wants it to be there, but it's rather nice that you can just put a ribbon across the opening, and if you think, well, don't come in just yet, and take it away when you want people to come through the door. It's just, it was a very important, that threshold, stepping over that threshold was more important than actually having a physical gateway or door. And then you walk along and look into the stupa, and then there's this axial relationship between the akshobhya and the stupa. Look out to the landscape here, have the shrine room where we are now, with this strong connection back to the stupa, and then all the ancillary accommodation, which is loos and everything else you need to make a shrine room work. And that was translating itself into this architecture of perforation. So here we're sitting under, I suppose, an extremely stylized tree, where when you move, when the light moves or a cloud passes in front of the sun, the light changes, and or obviously as the sun comes up and goes down. But then that also, that we didn't want any of these spaces to feel too disconnected from other spaces or from the surrounding landscape. So wherever you are, you can see from the Sangha courtyard into the Stupa courtyard. You can see from the Stupa courtyard into the Akshobhya. You can see out to the surrounding landscape. And this perforation in the brickwork gave that opportunity for some enclosure, but also for that sense of transparency.
Because it was always very important to us that you arrived at the shrine room at the end of a journey. So that actually, as you're moving from the communal, the collective ways we have of living and eating together, you're moving into a collective space again, a shrine room, but one that's got a more inner sort of quality to it, that helps us also go inwards. And it was about, how do you do that? You don't want to cut that off. You don't want to cut that whole sacred space off. You want to give glimpses, but you don't want to expose it too early on, because this is the jewel, if you like, in the crown of the retreat centre.
So I'll speed up a little bit, but there were sort of key elements that made this work. I've spoken about the walkways and the being able to get from one place to another without getting wet, and that was not just about not getting wet, obviously. It was also about the sense of feeling protected and enclosed, and we spent ages on the proportions of those walkways, on the height of the walkways, so they didn't feel too lofty. They felt enclosed, but you always had this view to one side, out to the landscape. And that we did lots of sketches to try and establish how tall and what the character of those walkways would be, and that there would always be something to see at the other end. There'd never be a blank wall. And then you've all had the chance to experience the communal building, but we spent a lot of time thinking about what that should feel like, and that's been quite another theme in this project. It's not somebody's home, it's not an institution, it's not corporate. It needs to have its own very distinct character, which is one of modesty, I think, was the word that we used. Nothing's there that doesn't really need to be there. There's nothing frivolous or sort of surplus to requirements. And that was part of how we made the budget work, really, was to be careful about spending the money where we needed to spend it, and really not spending it. We had endlessly long discussions about whether we should have a bell at the threshold of the shrine precinct. And just kind of all jointly came to the realization we didn't really need it. You can have a bell you ring by hand. So there was all of that going on at the same time, and this desire to follow this kind of mantra of truth to materials and have everything in its right place and have its own integrity. So that's hence the kind of approach to the bedrooms. If those of you who've had a chance to have a look into the bedrooms, they're very sort of basic and stripped down and just are what they need to be. In Akshobhya, again, we spent a long time thinking the back wall of the Akshobhya courtyard should be bright blue. I just come back from Marrakesh, I think. I thought that was a marvellous idea. And then just thought, actually, that's a really silly colour for this landscape and for this light and this climate. It's not going to work. And of course, why wouldn't it just be the same brick as the rest of the... So there were all these, some ideas that came and went, and hence why you see the Akshobhya where he, in his current setting, in the pond with the brick behind him. And Nagarachta said yesterday, which I thought was such a lovely comment, she said, it looks like a medieval library, because somehow the bricks sort of look like the spines of books, and I thought, actually, that's true. So thank you, Nagarachta.
And we have Chintamani's very beautiful Akshobhya. This time we fundraised from within our community, and were able to have it cast in bronze, and it only arrived on site at midday on Friday, so it just got here in the nick of time. But the whole of that courtyard was conceived of as a space in which to place Akshobhya in a way that allowed us to be reflective, contemplative and devotional. That's what everything in that courtyard is focused towards this figure.
And yeah, lots and lots of discussion about, I mean, Akshobhya obviously has a very strong, the relevance of water and the relevance of the colour blue. So those were still things that we were focused on, but not too literally. The water's fairly literal. And
although we would have had an infinity pool had I won the lottery.
And Stupa Courtyard, which you've seen, and lots of discussion about how tall, how big, and we'll talk a little bit more about the making of the stupa in a moment. But again, back to this idea that it was a dry, monochromatic, quite powerful space, which it sort of needs to be. And then obviously this room, and I mentioned the reference to the tree, the significance of the tree, the Bodhi tree. Again, not too literal, but there's that idea that the canopy of a tree filters light, and you're aware of changes in light and shadow. And we spent quite a lot of time looking at the work of other architects who had experimented with similar things. We quite quickly came on the idea, I had this idea that the space should be dark. That was inside, the colour should be dark. That was to complement what we knew was coming, which was this beautiful Rupa, and that this should be very definitely the focus of the axis of devotion, but the focus of this space. But also using the examples of marvellous architects like Peter Zumthor, and who understand the idea of this light filtering in. And the Jali wall idea came quite early on, as I said in the previous image.
Can I just speak to that? Although this image, these ideas were developed quite a long time ago, actually this space was the most difficult to design. To have a shrine room that wasn't an adaptation of an existing space left the field wide open. And then it was, well, what do you have? What do you have? What would work? And we looked at different materials, we looked at different shapes, for instance, different forms. There's a big discussion about what do you do with windows. Yeah, everyone thinks windows are a great idea. You can have people looking in, you can have people being distracted out. So how do you keep that connection with nature, the connection with the impermanence of things changing throughout the day, and not distract people, for instance? If we have all windows up here, and we did have designs that looked at that, it looks horribly like a gymnasium. And then you have the thing that there will have to be curtains, and then it just doesn't look like a shrine room. So this probably was the space that we wrestled with the most, and I think we went through half a dozen different designs. And when this all came together, it was like, yes, that's what it was supposed to be. That we knew that that sense of fit. We knew we'd got the apt form, for this space.
And so we knew that also within this dark, the way to offset the gold that we knew was coming was to make the space dark. And we looked at, that was a very important sort of aspect of this. Also the proportions of this niche, this having a kind of making a dent on the building, where we knew the Rupa was going to be, was also there was a lot of discussion about that. And the height, the size of the Rupa was another thing that we spent ages, thinking about, because obviously 5 meters would have been up against the ceiling, and the smaller one probably not big enough, and it needed to be bigger than Akshobhya, and somewhere and so there was a whole discussion about size as well, and then getting a huge amount of work gone into by Chintamani on the Rupa itself, and by other people who worked and helped, but on getting the whole composition of the niche and in the shrine room right, and that was also to do with. We spent ages. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Sorry. So Akshobhya, as I said, this Maitrivajri spoken about the Akshobhya figure having been recast in bronze, the same figure that was always here. So a lovely sort of historic connection to Vajrasana as it was, but also just a very, very beautiful Rupa. And I suppose I just wanted to say, when I first went to the LBC, I had this very kind of strong feeling about the Rupas that are there, and I went away having had this quite powerful reaction to them, thinking, why? Why did I feel that way? And apart from the fact that they're very beautiful, they also tread a line between East and West and male and female, and they're just incredibly clever. So I was very happy that there was that continuity with Chintamani's work from LBC to here in this Rupa, and then obviously to what you see in front of you now. Then the Stupa, Maitrivajri should talk about this because this is her drawing.
So it's a bit odd trying to design a stupa because it's a very familiar form. There's a multiplicity of these forms, and we didn't know quite how we were going to do it. But the LBC Council was on retreat with Subhuti at my Squin, and we had a few hours one afternoon, and I think we had to have it completed by about the Tuesday, the first shot at it. And basically the 5 of us who were on the Vajrasana subcommittee designed that stupa over that period of time, which just proves that things can be done by committee, actually. And then particularly Abhaya Vajra poured himself into refining it. So I can remember spending a day with Abhaya Vajra in his studio, and we mocked up a life-size scale of the entire spire, and then tried to work out a mathematical formula for the gaps between them and the amounts they reduced by, for instance. And Abhaya Vajra went on, he drew 2 different designs at half scale, brought them down to the LBC, and somehow we tacked them all to the walls of the shrine room, and then sat back and went, I think we'll have the earth element of that and the water element of that one, and, So there was this very, very strong stepping up from all of us, I think, to do what we hadn't done before, and to really try and do it to serve this ideal, to serve our love of the 3 jewels.
And then we decided it needed a suitable level of permanence, so we thought it should be made out of stone. And then we had to find someone who was prepared to make it. And we found these marvellous stonemasons in Northern Ireland who then drew everything that had been drawn before as a computer drawing, sent that back for comment, and then we went over there one cold and rainy day to this incredible factory in the middle of nowhere where they were cutting, slicing through these massive pieces of stone like a knife, through butter, literally. And it was marvellous to see it all coming together and becoming a reality. But even then, there were things we sat around the table and looked at and thought, oh, hang on a minute, that's not right. And we're still in time to make final little tweaks.
One of those things is now called by this firm the Abhaya Vajra detail.
Yes.
He's going to use it elsewhere.
and then we come to the main Rupa. So this was Chintamani's first sketch, and we spent some time working on models, starting with little maquette that big, and making a cardboard cutout of the model and thinking about the shape and the size and the colour and the setting, and how high it needed to be off the ground, and what might need to be in front of the Rupa, and all of those things that I knew absolutely nothing about. And so there was a big steep learning curve for us. And then Chintamani made a maquette, I suppose that big, of the figure, which then becomes is computer modelled to become the real size. And that was then made in Chintamani's studio, with a lot of love and care and hard work. And we then thought, how do we light it? Because it's the one thing we didn't want to happen. There's lights up here in the ceiling. We didn't want you to be able to see the source of the light. But you can't light completely from the top because the face is in shadow. So there was a whole... Then we brought in people who we thought could help us. We realised we needed some expert assistance. And so we went at our visit at Chintamani's studio, we worked out, you can see the blue dots on the back of the Rupa were where light fittings could go to shine back onto the niche that wouldn't be visible from anywhere around. And Chintamani took a paintbrush and made dots in the back of the Rupa that meant that we knew the exact position where these tiny little lights, they're about that big, would go, so that they wouldn't be visible, but you would just have this glow at the back of the Rupa. So sometimes these ideas which you have about how things should be take a little while to work out. And then just quickly, I'll finish off with some site photographs. So we flattened the site and started, and until about, I'd say, 4 weeks ago, this place was a big patch of mud. And it was the muddiest place I've ever been in my life. We would every time you came here, you just leave covered in mud. So it stayed like that for quite a long time. This was putting up the portal frames for the communal building, very exciting day. The shrine room coming together when we sort of realized, all of us stood in here before the roof had gone on, before anything, and sort of realized what we'd got. And it was a very exciting moment. Walls going up. It wasn't often like that, the weather, I have to say. Then all of it coming together with all the Sangha courtyard starting to take shape. That was a very exciting moment. Starting to get the sense of the proportion of these spaces. Thinking, oh, maybe we got that right. That was kind of exciting. Seeing the shrine room become what it is, very exciting time. The walkways, those plastic protectors stayed on those columns until about a few days ago, and it was wonderful to see them come off and just see how beautiful the concrete is. As I said, about this idea of truth to materials, sort of covering things up that don't need to be covered up. And then that you get some, as you will have seen, anyone who's here last night, some very spectacular light late in the evening, reflected in the windows up there of the shrine room. And this was the stupa being craned into place, and the trees had already been brought in a few days before. That was a good day, and then the crane able to locate the stupa absolutely precisely, with a bit of help from a few people on its base. So that was a nice thing to witness. And the trees, unfortunately, when they first arrived, the trees in the Sangha courtyard had this wonderful blossom on them, and the blossom's all gone now, but it will return. And lots and lots of hard work by a lot of people on this element of the shrine room, a great kind of team effort. And we're very excited about the light and how it comes into the shrine room. You'll see lots of photographs that look like that. And you can't work too hard on a building site, and you must have lots of tea, even if you're the landscape contractor. So there was always a great feeling. There was a great spirit on the site. Always we ate together, we drank together, drank tea together. We had there was a fantastic can-do attitude, to use that old cliche, right from the beginning. There were lots of problems, there were lots of issues that we had to overcome, but they were all, everything was always possible because of the genuine spirit of teamwork on this project. And that's I just wanted to, if I may, just very briefly, I know we've gone over time a bit, but...
Say one
yeah, of course.
Yeah. One of the things that's been going through my mind is that for some of us, we've been involved with shaping these buildings, shaping this project for a number of years. And I stand in it now, and it's completed, and it feels like it will shape us. Yeah, this is now a retreat centre that will shape us. It has its own life now, beautifully brought to life in this room by Chintamani's Rupa. So, thank you.
I just want to, from just 1 minute, thank a few people. And some of these people were thanked yesterday. But the contractors were amazing. We were very, very lucky to find them. They were SEH French, and they just could not have done a better job, really. Not because they were the best, they were fantastic builders, but it was just they entered into the spirit of the project, and we were lucky to have them. Like as did the design team, from engineers to everybody, from the person who helped us sort out the bats while we were doing the planning application, to the fact that this whole roof up here, which you never see, is covered with photovoltaic cells, and this building is really as environmentally friendly and has as little impact on the environment as we could possibly afford for it to have. As Maitrivajri's mentioned, the landscape architects, BHSLA, who were here the day before the opening, planting plants, and have just put so much love and thought into the landscape of this project, the landscape setting, which is what makes it so special. And Spears and Major, who I don't know if they're here today, but they worked tirelessly up till, I think Maitrivajri said, midnight on Monday, adjusting the lighting and getting the lighting right. And to Chintamani for the inspiration of the Rupa figure that you see before you, as a culmination of a journey, really, from the first Rupas at the LBC. And I've already thanked my own team, our office team, all of whom were here yesterday. But I just wanted say a special thank you to Lucrezia, who's here today. Lucrezia was the project architect on the site who lived and breathed this project and put so much love and time into it. It would honestly not be anything like what it is now without Lucrezia's endeavours. And I joked yesterday that Lucrezia had a fantastic relationship with the site team, and when things were going well, she was Lucrezia, and when things were going badly, she was that Italian woman. And Maitrivajri, with her kindness and consistency and knowledge of architecture and deep love for the LBC and Vajrasana, has just been an incredible client, as have the rest of the group, our group of 5, which included Abhay Vajra, Maitreya Bandhu, Yanavacha, and Parama Bandhu. But I think my final thanks is to the LBC as an organisation. As I said at the beginning, we were, over the moon to be appointed to do this project. It's an opportunity of a lifetime for any architectural practice. I don't know that I'll ever get to do another project like this. I've certainly never done one before. But the LBC had an innate understanding of how to be a good client. And that's partly, I think, to do with the Buddhist philosophy, and being kind and having a sense of humour about things, and not having a culture of blame when something goes wrong, because things go wrong always. Just made it, it's very unusual in the building industry, and it made it such a joy. But, it isn't easy to be a good client, and many people have no idea how to be a good client. And it's just an absolute honour and a pleasure right from the beginning to the end. So thank you.